correspondent Francesca Chambers. We've also got Independent Women's Forum Director of Policy Hadley Heath Manning, Democratic strategist Antoine Sebright, on all of the above. Let me get from you, Francesca, a sense of where folks are telling you this potentially stands. If they go still with a committee vote on Thursday, or is that at the very least put off?
So the White House is kicking it to the Senate, saying this is something that they'll have to decide, which gives them a little wiggle room here. Because, Neil, as you're pointing out, this all happened very quickly over the weekend and took them by surprise. And this is not something that the White House expected. And so they're kind of struggling with how to handle this. We know that Brett Kavanaugh was at the White House this morning. We believe that he's still here, at least before we got up here. I'm told by his spokesman, Raj Shah, though, that he was not meeting with the president here, that he was here for other meetings. So there's a lot of speculation that he might have been meeting with White House counsel if he wasn't meeting with the president. But I think that alone tells you a lot about what the thinking is here at the White House if it didn't rise to the level where the president felt that he needed to speak with Kavanaugh himself, at least not yet.
You know, Hadley, demanding one of the issue for Republicans, if they're in a no-win situation here, if they look like they readily dismiss this woman's allegations from decades ago, it could alienate them among female voters, so they want to be careful about that. Others say that this is important to get done and get done soon, that a Supreme Court position that is still, up in the air going into the midterms, that isn't constructive either. What are you hearing?
Well, there are certainly a lot of questions about this accusation, one unsubstantiated accusation from 30-odd years ago. It is something that those questions deserve to be asked and heard. But I think on top of that, Neil, there are questions that we ought to be asking as citizens about this process. We know that Senator Feinstein knew about these accusations months ago. Why is it here at the 11th hour that we're finally talking about this publicly? It seems that our Supreme Court, the one body in our government that's supposed to be non-political, because the body has stepped into policymaking far beyond its initial constitutional role, it is over-politicized. And that's why we are where we are today. Of course, those questions, we could litigate the accusation here. There's a lot about the accusation that lacks credibility. But more importantly, we ought to be asking questions about the politicization of this particular claim.
Antoine, where do you think this goes or risks going for Democrats? Let's say this woman's story is legit. Who knows? But it goes back to high school. It's a back and forth about whether that would be a damaging issue to get them on the Supreme Court. But do they risk looking overly politicized and zealous on this, trying to stop a legitimate nominee? What do you think?
I don't think they look overly zealous. I think they are doing the work that their constituents elected them to do. I commend the Democrats for this process. Your previous guest talked about this process being politicized. Well, I'm old enough to remember the Republicans politicizing President Obama's nominee, who would not even give him a hearing. So this is
par for the course. Are you saying
this
is tit for tat?
No, what I'm saying is they started this, so the Democrats are just carrying out their work. The bottom line for Democrats, particularly those in swing states, this is going to be a matter of whether you're going to take the bait and feed into the Republican narrative of trying to scare you to not voting for this nominee, or whether you're going to do what you think is in the best interest of your constituents and do what's right.
Well, we'll see. Francesca, I'm just curious from what you're hearing. This will ultimately be a he said, she said thing, very similar to the, Juanita Hill and, of course, what was going on with Clarence Thomas. Was who you believe. Now, he ultimately made it to the Supreme Court despite these allegations. These are a little different because they go all the way back to high school, nearly 4 decades. Having said all of that, what are people telling you about the fortune of this nomination?
Well, the White House very much wants Judge Kavanaugh to have an opportunity to share his side of the story. We've already heard from both him and the woman in written statements, but the idea that she could testify and also that he could testify, they at least want his side of the story to be heard. So now it really becomes a matter of whether, as you discussed before, that's something that could happen by Thursday. It could happen before a vote would take place in the committee. Democrats have made it clear that they're not going to vote for him coming out of the committee. So it really relies with the Republicans on that committee and whether or not he could make it through that committee, or, as was talked about earlier, could even make it on the floor, even if he made it through committee, given everything that we've now learned, if he doesn't have an opportunity to say his side of the story.
Now, we haven't heard what Susan Collins in Maine or Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, 2 prominent Republicans who would feel undue pressure probably because of this, to vote yay or nay. I mean, we haven't heard anything at all. But if they opted out and Jeff Flake opted out, he's already urging that he doesn't think it's good to advance a vote and bring this to the full Senate this week. What are we looking at?
Right, and a couple of those votes undecided or at least not clear to the public even before this accusation came to light over the weekend. So certainly senators will have to consider this. But this is very different from what happened with Merrick Garland because this accusation speaks to someone's personal character. And it has to be taken in context with the weight of the evidence on both sides. And we know that there are women and men who have spoken very highly of Brett Kavanaugh, Judge Kavanaugh's personal character and his professional excellence throughout his career. So we have to take this accusation in that broader context.
All right, guys, I want to thank you. We're waiting for breaking news on this subject.